God, it's such a privilege to be here and to be able to touch a moon bear.
Exactly.
That's magical, isn't it?
For all of us, it never stops.
I bet,
ever,
yes.
Ever.
But it's a strangely moving thing, isn't it, to see a bear like this? It's very touching.
Yeah. But it's an opportunity just to be able to pick anything up, because the signs can be so subtle.
Yeah.
And sometimes the ultrasound especially can pick things up, you know, that we would never have suspected.
Uh-huh. These pads feel, and of course they're cold now because of the anaesthetic, yeah?
Yeah, he'll be warmed up now as well. He'll wear gloves. Press hard here and feel normal flesh, and then just work your way over to that scar tissue, and you feel the difference.
Oh yes, it's so hard, isn't it?
Hard. Yeah, it's all knobbly.
It's terrible. And is that the little scar there?
Yeah, it's a lot of scars all around here and up to here, actually.
Few acts of man are more cruel than bear bile farming. The bears are condemned into coffin-sized cages. A tap is inserted through a hole carved into the abdomen and gallbladder to collect bile for human consumption. In medicines, wines, toothpaste and face creams, the list goes on. Since 1993, one woman has worked tirelessly to end this practice. This is her story.
I find it very emotional coming here, and I find it incredibly affecting. And it's something to do with the kind of just the location and the piece, but it's the extraordinary contrast of having so many wild animals in the same place. And do you find you feel that all the time?
I do. I just feel I've come home when I come here. Someone described it as food for the soul. And I just can't find a better description than that. You just feel so grounded and so understanding why we're all here.
When you started this charity, how long ago was that?
98.
98. Did you ever imagine in 1998 that this would be it?
I would have been running for the farthest hill in the universe, I think, if I'd ever thought that the years would have been like they had, you know. But when you're younger, you're just so fired up by what you see and what you think you want to do. And there just seems to be no fear behind it. You're just focused and you think, I know what we have to do. And in a sense, we did do what we had to do, but getting there wasn't so easy.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever met anybody who has two such completely opposite sides to her personality, you know, they're wildly different. And very, very obvious when you get to know her. On the one side, she's this, you know, vivacious, I think gorgeous looking blonde woman who charms people. She's very, very self-effacing, very modest. On the other side, you know, her work and the place she's inhabiting is so dark and so distressing sometimes and so upsetting. But inside of her there is this fierce warrior, I would say. She's like a modern-day warrior.
She's modest. She's self-effacing. She's a true and genuine friend, and in life they're rare, those kind of friends. But she's certainly one of my most loved and trusted friends.
But it is, it's such a place of peace here.
It's a perfect Sunday morning, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Looks like it might be three-legged Harvey. About 30% of our bears are missing legs.
Are they really?
Yeah, in total. And we used to sort of have dedicated disabled areas, you know, because we felt that they couldn't, you know, protect themselves if there was a fire. And it's absolutely the wrong advice, you know. We learnt very quickly you can mix disabled bears with fully abled bears, because it's all down to bluff. And so you can hear her popping. She's doing that vocalisation. That's actually warning Marie. I'm here.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear it, yeah.
That was my first ever introduction to a moon bear, that popping vocalisation, because it was such an alarm bell and a stress signal from them. And it's used in a variety of ways here. It could mean I'm behind you and I don't mean you harm. It could mean I'm behind you and I do mean you harm.
Yeah.
I met my future boss on the beach, walking his cat.
Were you in animal welfare then?
I wasn't, but I'd always loved animals.
Yeah.
Always loved animals, ever since I could say the word animal, you know, before that actually. But then when I saw this guy walking his cat on the beach, I just thought, wow, he's obviously someone I'd like to say hello to. And then I got introduced to him and his wife, and we started talking. Turned out he was working for IFOR, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and I'd always fundraised for them in the UK as a supporter, you know, sent them money and things. So it was, wow, okay, what do you do? And he was the Asia consultant for IFOR. And I said, goodness, if you need any help, I'd love to.
That's incredibly sort of serendipitous, isn't it?
Yeah.
What sort of animals were you dealing with?
I did a lot of undercover investigations. So I was going to South Korea, the Philippines, and China, obviously.
Yeah. When you went to Korea and the Philippines, were you sort of dealing with the dog meat trade, things like that? Then?
Mostly the dog meat trade and going to the awful live animal markets, but then I would go to sort of the wild markets as well, where they were using animals in traditional medicine.
Yeah.
So obviously seeing things then that was just really opening my eyes to the reality of living in Asia, you know, things that I could never have comprehended before. I encountered bears I'll never forget this, by seeing their paws in Qingping Market in Guangzhou. I saw a box full of bear paws in Qingping Market.
What were they doing there?
Being sold for bear paw soup. And I just looked absolutely aghast. I think I've still got the picture to this day, and couldn't really comprehend what I was looking at.
In 1985, Jill took up permanent residence in Hong Kong with her then husband John, and immediately fell in love with the city.
Your first time in this part of the world?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
And as soon as I landed, I knew I'd come home. Seriously, it was as simple as that.
What made you feel that?
I loved everything about it, about Asia, about Hong Kong. I loved the people, I loved the food, I loved the energy of Hong Kong. I just became so absorbed in these investigations, in the whole aspect of animal welfare, about the principle of throwaway dogs at that time. You know, there was things like 101 Dalmatians came to Hong Kong and everyone wanted a Dalmatian, but when they realised that sometimes they poop on the carpet, or, you know, they didn't sort of fit in with the natural lifestyle of people, they would throw these dogs on the streets. So, you know, goodness, John and I, at the height of our sort of collection, if you like, of rescued animals, we had 9 dogs and 9 cats.
Oh my goodness.
And John was so tolerant of that. We had a deal that if I saved them, he could name them. So we had some animals with appalling names, but John had a great sense of humour. It was early 1998, and I just said to him, I really want to start a foundation that specifically helps bears, specifically gets to the core of how I feel about what I want to do in the future with helping bears.
That's a major philosophical choice for anyone to make.
It was black and white.
Yeah.
It was totally black and white. I absolutely knew that I wanted to set something up that worked specifically on this issue from a local perspective, because at that time, as wonderful as IFOR was, and it is a wonderful organisation, it is very much seen obviously as an international organisation, or it was then, within the realms of China. So I wanted to devote my time to being seen as a local group with local people who cared as much as I did about this one specific issue. At that time as well, I had another very great heroine in my life, and her name was Virginia McKenna.
Oh yes, yeah.
And as John and I were talking, he just said, pick up the phone and talk to Virginia. Just ask Virginia and say, what should we do?
That moment when Jill called me, and I was down in my office in the garden here at home, and the phone rang. I was just there on my own, and I picked it up, and it was her. And she said, I don't know what to do, because she realised that her mission was to do something for the bears. She said, what shall I do? I said, well, you have to do it. You have to try. Because if you don't try, even if you fail, if you don't try, you'll always wish you had done it. Because you can't, when you get a hugely strong feeling like that, and you understand more than anyone, as she does, the challenges that await you, and maybe some she hadn't even realised, it is daunting. But because it's so profound and so deep, in you as a person, you have to try.
But there was an even greater catalyst that inspired Jill to make a decision to start the Animals Asia charity. 5 years before her call to Virginia, she witnessed something that would change her life forever.
It was in 1993, and a journalist friend of mine had called me and said that he'd just come back from one of these awful, notorious farms in southern China. And because he knew I was working in welfare, he just felt that I should go along and see it. And something compelled me to do exactly that. And I called a couple of friends, one of whom was a vet, and we decided to take a day trip with tourists. And so we joined Japanese and Taiwanese tourists to go along to this farm. And first of all, we were upstairs on the roof of the farm where the shop was. And the farmer was obviously desperately trying to sell his bear bile medication to the tourists. And we knew where we wanted to be, and that was nowhere near the shop. It was downstairs where the bears were actually being extracted of their bile, and it was sort of one of the farmer's best kept secrets where the tourists simply weren't allowed to be. So we broke away from the group and we found this door that opened to stairs leading down into a basement, and we walked down. And I just remember just walking into my own living hell. I'd never seen anything quite so awful in all my life. And it was a very dark room with sort of clattering cages around where the bears were obviously rocking backwards and forwards in abject misery of their pain. And as I was walking around, just trying to take in what I was seeing, which was just bears in cages so small they could hardly move. It was bears with wounds across their body and scars where they'd grown into the cage bars. It was like teeth broken where they'd been bar biting, and catheters protruding from their abdomens where bile was just running down their stomachs onto the floor below. And at one point I backed too closely into a cage because I felt something touch my shoulder. And I remember being so shocked because I thought I was going to be hurt. And I turned around and I just saw this paw sticking out from a cage. That was the first vision. And then I looked from the paw to the eyes of this bear, and she had the most beautiful brown eyes, and she was just blinking at me, just so sadly out of the bars of the cage, just obviously again in just suffering and in such misery. And I just remembered the practical side of me thinking I shouldn't do anything with that paw, but she just had it there. She didn't take it back. And I took it with my hand, and she just squeezed my fingers. Just the tips of her paw with the claws and everything. We just had that moment together of hand on paw. And I looked at her eyes, and she still held my eyes with hers. And she was blinking and blinking. And I just wanted to apologise to her for the most awful species that had put her inside those bars and was responsible for her suffering. And I think I knew then that I'd never see her again. But it just changed everything about my life, everything. And I don't even know how we separated. I just think I said sorry inside me to her. And I gave her a name that was Hong, which means bear in Cantonese. And I just walked out that farm, just hoping that I could help her and the bears I was leaving behind. And I really hope she's dead now, because I never saw her again. But she started the dream of the China Bear Rescue. And she started everything. She started everything.
The 5 years between meeting Hong and actually starting the charity was a difficult and often frustrating learning curve. However, in that time, Jill and her small team experienced their very first rescue of 9 bears from a bile farm.
Oh, the first rescue. It was a mixture of emotions, the first rescue. It was happiness, it was shocking, I can't even describe it. It's like, because we were all involved. It was very labor intensive, because we all have to carry the cages. We didn't have a lot of staff to help us. So it was tiring, but it was rewarding. At the same time, it was encouraging, but it was shocking. All a mixture of emotions. We had to work day after day, early morning till night, and then early morning probably for a week. Which is non-stop, we hardly got any sleep, everybody was very excited.
How did you, Jill, start to create a care package for wild animals that, without being rude, you had little knowledge of?
A learning curve, just literally.
Yeah.
Literally so vertical, yeah. All of us were, it has to be said, we were scrabbling in the dark.
Yeah.
She's done so much amazing work around it and brought attention around the world to something that's so despicable. You know, it's sort of like pebbles in the sand, really. You know, you put these little pebbles together and before you know it, you got a full beach. It grows. It just, people connecting in the smaller numbers, it gradually builds and builds and builds, and it's an organic thing. And Jill's taken years and years and years and years to build this project to where it is, and now the only real serious issue she has is keeping it going.
What percentage of the population of China would even know that these bile farms exist?
A lot now absolutely know that it's happening,
Yeah.
but you know, it's in those days just no one, absolutely no one had any idea, and possibly even then, because of the concept of animal welfare, probably a lot of people didn't care either. You know, because remember, we're coming from a period of great hardship. You know, from the 60s, the late 50s, the 60s, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, things that are very sensitive now that you really don't talk about, where animals literally again were there simply for utilisation, only for utilisation. The very concept of what I was going to with the government, you know, was anathema to them. They just couldn't believe this Westerner was, you what? You want to do what? You know, and why are you interfering? Who do you think you are? You know?
They must have thought you were a bit strange. And
I'm sure they thought I was completely dotty, but I think they felt that I was rather inoffensive as well, because I was obviously a short, quietly spoken Western woman, you know, that wasn't sort of going in guns blazing. I'd been there long enough to understand at least some cultural aspects of the country. So I think my manner at least sat comfortably with them, and I think they did somewhat welcome at least some thoughts.
A week earlier, Jill lost one very important bear. Jasper was a representation of the horrors of bile farming, and yet conversely, the compassion of humans. But he was more than just an iconic symbol. He was Jill's friend.
I just fell in love with him from the second he arrived. It's difficult to explain, but he was there in that awful crush cage, and even from that second he had that sort of sense of mischief about him, because I remember he was another bear that would put his paw out, and it just felt, you know, the right thing to pat his paw, and he returned the pat, and I never forget that. And I just thought, goodness, there's a fun-loving bear in the middle of all that misery and suffering inside that crush cage. And it was, as we integrated him with the other bears after he'd had his surgery. I mean, he had the most enormous catheter in his abdomen. It was one of those crude metal implements of shame, you know, that must have caused him so much pain. But as soon as that was out of his belly, and as soon as he was in the enclosure, he immediately got the label as the peacemaker, because he would romp around with his best friends. He would, you know, he would break up disagreements with the other bears, and he just made it his life's mission, I think, to be what we called as our forgiving bear.
So Jasper had a health check about 3 months ago, and we had detected some changes on his ultrasound, and we knew that things weren't right. But it wasn't so definitive that we had to make that decision that day, and we wanted to give him as much quality time as we could. But over the following 3 months, you know, his appetite wasn't great, and he was still playing and he was still being quite active, but he just wasn't Jasper anymore. So knowing that, fearing what we might find on his follow-up health check, we had spoken to Jill. We wanted her to be here. We wanted her to have some nice time with Jasper before we did do the health check. So she actually came a few days beforehand and was there when he was loaded into his hospital cage and was giving him lots of treats and love and attention. And Jill was also there on the day we did his health check, and she was there when we did the ultrasound, and that's when we found that the tumour in his liver had progressed.
And I think that's why it was the most awful shock we found it, saw him on the surgery table and on the health check table, you know, ostensibly just checking a nodule on his liver that we thought was really unremarkable, you know, and then just to hear Eddie, our vet, as she decided to go in to perform surgery, just to go in there and have a look at what the ultrasound was now picking up as something bigger, and just looking up at me with tears pouring down her face.
I don't think I've ever cried in a surgery before, but actually having to tell Jill and to show her the tumour at that time. Yeah, it was really difficult because we all knew how much Jasper meant to her.
I knew then we'd lost this iconic bear that just symbolised every bear that we've got at this sanctuary. You know, such a special, special animal that, as I say, just symbolised the charisma, the forgiveness, the remarkable majesty of these animals that we care for all of their lives. And he's gone.
Jasper was a favourite to all, but we all know that Jasper was Jill's good friend. And I don't think I've ever seen Jill so upset. Yeah, it was a truly, it was a terrible day, I think, for all of us, particularly Jill. And to be able to see someone of Jill's stature to show that amount of emotion and love and care for her friend in front of everybody, just shows how much these bears mean to us. Yeah, and the amazing thing about Jill is even though she was feeling all that pain, she still wanted to inspire our team and turn it into a positive, that even though we'd lost Jasper, the legacy that he's left behind is only going to make our cause stronger.
There's a great saying by Napoleon. He spoke about China, and it always reminds me of the bears, because he just said, "There lies a sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world." And that's how I think about this place of peace, with all these incredible ambassadors, these iconic spirits of animals that we've loved and lost in our lives. And I just feel that somewhere on this universe, these animals are rising up. And one day bear farming will be done. Because how can they have died in vain?
Every 2 years, the bears in the sanctuary receive a full and detailed health check. Today is the turn of a bear called Douglas, who's being taken to the surgery for his medical checkup. Although routine, these health checks give the vets and nurses unparalleled access to the bear's health both internally and externally. However, physically transferring a 200-kilo bear to theatre involves complicated and demanding logistics. Fortunately, the sanctuary has a very skilled team of bear movers who work closely with the vet team, ensuring the safety and stress-free carriage of the bears from their enclosures to the veterinary building. It's an incredibly slick operation performed by a group of adept Chinese men and women. Upon arrival, Douglas is safely anesthetized, and once fully sedated, he is assessed by the vet before being transferred to the purpose-built theatre table.
Jill, do you take part in this procedure always?
If I'm here, I just always want to be with the bear in the surgery, and I think just because of simply having done this for about 20 years, even though I'm not a vet, obviously, just in the field, I can help the team if there's a lot of bears to deal with, so it's quite nice just to keep my hand in.
Yeah, wonderful.
His fur is quite soft, actually, isn't it, Eddie? It's uniquely so.
It is very soft, isn't it?
It's usually more bristly.
Yes.
It's got a lovely, lovely coat.
Can you tell anything about the health from the coat?
Yes, you can. Jasper's was quite harsh, but also had a browny tinge to it. And sometimes if it starts to fall out a little bit as well, it just is, they're compromised in some way.
Yeah. Ah, poor bears.
It's working now.
Okay, let's see if we can give him a little manicure.
They are really strong.
They're tough, aren't they?
Yeah.
But this is just helps them a little bit, because we do, just because again they've been so compromised on the farms, they're not able to wear them down.
Yeah.
And they grow in sometimes odd positions as well, so the health check is very good for just taking them off.
Yes.
So they don't start growing around and growing into the pads.
God, they are very, very strong.
Yeah. So there. Thank
Oh,
you.
I can now say I'm a bear
Manicurist.
Manicurist, yes.
Well, Jill as a boss is like no other boss that I've ever had, and I'm pleased to say I can call her a good friend as well as my boss. And she's definitely somebody who inspires with her leadership, and is always so positive, and, and he thinks so too. This is one side. So this is the bear you normally see climbing the tree. He's usually sat up the tree. So, what do you want to say, mate? You heard talking about Jill. You're so handsome. You could be the spokesbear for your species.
You have so many visitors to your sofa, don't you? So
Well,
wonderful.
this is actually not your sofa or mine picture.
Yes.
This is technically Muppet and Toe Tie's sofa.
Well, I'm sure.
You see her smiling?
Yeah, beautiful.
That's what saved her life.
You mean you saw her in a cage in a dog
Smiling
farm?
like that,
Yeah.
that ingratiating
Yeah.
smile that dogs sometimes,
It's
when
amazing.
they're not growling or snarling, they're just doing that.
Were both Muppet and Tazai, were they both dog meat dogs?
Both meat dogs,
Yeah,
yeah.
isn't that dreadful?
She was a market in the south in a cage when I was doing an investigation, and he was on a meat truck.
Yeah.
The dog meat festivals of Yulin and beyond are another area of focus for Jill and her team, as they endeavour to bring an end to the theft, slaughter and consumption of millions of dogs every year. Like the Bear Bile farms, the conditions are horrendous, often barbaric, and an assault on one's sensibilities.
It's just quite one of the most awful things that one can do in one's life, is just to look into the eyes of a dog that's just about to be slaughtered. And we've done it time and time again. And I think for me, the only way I can get over that is simply by looking in those dogs' eyes and saying sorry. Just apologising to them for the species that we are, and taking those pictures, not wasting them, so the dogs will never die in vain, and just hoping that, you know, ultimately in this generation and generations to come, the industry will reduce and end, because there are so many people today abhorrently against it. And yeah, and I guess the other thing as well, you're looking at Tojo and Muppet, you know, outside. This is perhaps one of my ways of trying to redeem my soul, you know, and just helping a couple of them.
Mm-hmm. The most upsetting job on the universe is the job that you have, Jill. So, I mean, how do you deal with it? How do you get through it, and who helps you?
I'm extremely lucky that I have a sister that's a year younger than me, and we're so close. I absolutely love her more than I can say, and her family, her husband Steve, and my gorgeous niece Nicole, their daughter.
And your sister is Anne?
She's Anne. They live in Clacton-on-Sea, and we call each other at least twice a week, and every morning we have a very quick email, every single morning, just a quick one. And I always say they ground me. They're beautiful, normal people that you can be yourself with, you know, and don't judge or anything. But having said that, with Anne, I always made myself a promise that I don't burden her with anything deliberately. So she's a worrier, and I don't want to worry her.
I think part of her skill as a leader, if you like, and she's a very good leader, is she takes responsibility for a lot. And I think in her mind, she probably thinks that she can stand alone and take the brunt of things, and that she's tough enough to do that. And in many ways she is, but nobody should be in a position where they don't have permission to have a bad day. Do you know what I mean? And I think she is alone sometimes, and she never complains about that, ever. But as her friend, I worry for her. I don't want her to feel isolated or on her own with this. I really don't. So that's why I say we owe her our full support. You know, if you care about her, that's the one thing we can do, is just stand with her.
I suppose it would be dishonest to say that, of course, being the CEO, especially as a single person, without a family in China or Vietnam, inevitably there will be some very lonely times. But because her soul and her whole being is so filled with her cause, with what she has to do and her dedication to the bears and her work, and the wonderful way she's gathered in so many Chinese people to understand what she's doing and why she's doing it, and how one must be kind to animals and not make them suffer. I think that loneliness, which might from time to time come upon her, is put in a balance by all the other aspects of her life. Loneliness is something you can learn to live with, actually. You know, other things come in, and also it's quite good sometimes to be alone and not be lonely. You don't have to be lonely because you're alone. And I think probably that applies to Jill.
Do you feel you've given up a huge amount?
You know what, my biggest bugbear is when people start talking about sacrifices. I really, really hate that word, sacrifice. You do what you do. You do what you do because you want to do it, you know. You might give things up, but I think the only person that can say they sacrifice are people that fight for our country. Sometimes I think you feel the loss of maybe those times at the end of the day when you do want to sort of talk to someone and say, God, what a bitch of a day I've had, you know, and to be able to have that flexibility, that ease of talking with someone very close to you about that. But, you know, at the same time, you know, I've just got Nick in the hospital, we can go up and have a chat with each other, and that's, again, without good reason. This is called the crying city, you know, we can have a bit of a chin wag together. I can with Boris, for goodness sake, as well, exactly the same. Boris and I have lived through perhaps even more because he's been here since the start of Animals Asia, from day one, you know, and we used to fight like cat and dog, like an old married couple as well.
In what sort of way? What sort of way?
Oh, we'd fall out with each other all the time, really, really badly. Boris and I, we'd be screaming at each other.
I wouldn't call them argument. I think this is how I see it. I'm more of a practical person, you know. I'm the kind of guy that try to put everything into perspective and how to logistically make it happen. Jill is a visionary. You know, she envisions things that I'm thinking, you're out of your mind. She's proven me wrong over and over again. You know, like the first thing was about bear farming. You know, she wants to come to China and said, well, I was trying to help end this thing. I thought, you're out of your mind. You know, she's the one that exposed it to the world about this practice. And then she said, next thing is, well, let's go back there and help them to end it. I go, you're crazy. I think, you know, that makes it, I think between Jill and I, we make a very good partnership because she dares to think, she dares to say it, and I'm thinking, how do you make it happen? And then I sit down and calm down and say, okay, well, let's do this. So I think before we can sit down and calm down and say things, I'm going, what in the world are you? That's it. It's not argument, we don't fight.
Yes, she is quite feisty. Yeah, you wouldn't want to get in her way collecting bags from a carousel. Yeah, it can be quite pushy here. People push you out of the way. Jill gives as good as she gets.
Over 90% of the sanctuary workers are Chinese, many of whom share the same love for the bears. It's a remarkable contrast to the Western perspective of Asia, and something Jill has worked towards tirelessly, changing people's attitudes peacefully, intelligently, and from the inside out.
It's quite interesting because we've obviously been here, I've been here for 30 years, you know, and when I first came there was one animal welfare group and now there's 150 animal welfare groups, and it's just such a robust movement now across the country with people that are very intelligently charged with championing the rights of animals. For example, we had a foie gras factory that never made it into the country at all because the groups just said, not in our backyard. We don't want the development of anything like this because it's so cruel. So they have these little victories and they take enormous, you know, momentum and confidence and just go on to create a remarkable difference actually for the animals here in China.
Jill not only has done things for animals, which we all know about, but she's done things for people. People who perhaps didn't think about animals in the way that they do after having met Jill or working with Jill. And it's not what she's necessarily said. I always think in life the most impact that people have had on me is from looking at that person and watching what they do, trying to understand what they do and why they do it, not what they tell me. I don't need to be told, I just need to see it, to experience it, and that's what has affected me. And that's absolutely what sums up Jill. It's her. She doesn't have to say anything because she's doing it.
It's a great pleasure that I'm able to help her. She came to China for black bears. I heard her story before. After she came to China initially, she found bears in a bear farm. I was touched by her story. As a foreigner, she came all the way to China doing things for bears, while as Chinese, we didn't initiate doing it ourselves. She started to do this. It's worth admiring. I've been working with her for several years now. She's very friendly, helping us all with a lot of things. I admire her very much.
We all admire her. She's made such a big contribution to this career. The time she impressed me most was when she came back to the centre barefooted after our driver picked her up from the airport without her shoes. She really forgets herself through her dedication to this work.
Do you get personal attacks that you find difficult to deal with?
Well, it's yeah. I mean, we do. You know, certainly from obviously from people involved in issues like this. You know, but I think again, it's sticks and stones. There's a great saying by Gandhi that says, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I think we're very definitely at the fighting stage now. So we're obviously going to pick up people along the way that don't agree with our viewpoint or our, you know, the way that we're moving in this. So, you know, you may go to bed a little bit miserable with some of the accusations that we receive, and certainly when they become at a height that it becomes very public, that can be very hurtful and very sort of demeaning, if you like. But, you know, you've seen that we are a team here as well, and we take great comfort from each other as well, talk it through, and again, tomorrow's another day.
Oh, sure.
You know, when it gets too much, well, God, my old saying to the staff is I'd get on my walkie-talkie and I'd say, just leave me alone for a little bit, I need to go and have a meeting with Jasper. I'd always say that, and I'd go and have a meeting with Jasper. And now I'll have a meeting with Prince and Peanut and Douglas and all the other guys out there. And seriously, does it affect me badly? Absolutely not.
Yes, but I can understand that. I mean, the problem is too big to be personally affected by those that don't agree with you.
I'm not going to wake up at the end of my life regretting what I've done.
To say that Jill's done a major, major thing to help change the world, that's an understatement. You know, I think that not only is she changing the life of these great bears, but she's also changing the life of the community that is Chengdu and the life of the people in Vietnam. And she's changing the life of millions and millions of people around the world just by caring.
Are there no mornings when you wake up and you put your head in your hands and think, what have I done? You never think that?
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course. Sometimes you feel like that. But again, you know, I am my father's daughter as well.
What does that mean?
Well, my dad was a very principled person and he was a very resolute person. And he would always say to me things like, hit it hard and don't tell me how you can't do a thing, tell me how you can. Very, very regimented. My dad was our ex-RAF squadron leader, but a very gentle man too. Could be as well. Like those days when you're in bed and you think, oh crap, I can't get out of bed this morning because I just don't want to face the day, and always without fail I say hit it hard. I say it out loud, hit it hard.
You were brought up by your dad?
My mum died when my sister and I were babies.
Oh, right.
And then Dad brought us up for a little while, but he was absolutely heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken when my mother died. And he always said she was the best woman in the world. He said something else as well about her, which brings things back full circle. He said she died screaming in agony, and she died of septicemia, which is one of the diseases that kills our bears today.
The scars from bear bile farming are present and obvious on every rescued bear, both physically and mentally. The tools of the trade are designed with the specific purpose of extracting bile from the gallbladder in the most cost-effective way.
So this is a collection, Jill, of old farm catheters, yeah? And this, for instance, this all came from one bear?
Yes, it will have done. So it's the whole procedure there, basically, with the catheters that go into the gallbladders, with the latex tube that comes out and into the full metal jacket that we saw before, and into the bag that collects the bile.
So all of this sort of wire work...
This will be outside of the bear, and this will be inside of the bear, the thinner tube.
And the thinner tube goes into the gallbladder?
Yeah.
And then they extract it with this?
Right.
It's disgusting, isn't it? And
I always think it's like medieval England, you know.
Absolutely. What is extraordinary is you can smell it, and it smells disgusting.
Still years later, you never lose that smell. So that's another example of the catheter as well. And then the next thing that came into being was the metal catheter. Yeah. And sometimes they had wings at the end of them to prevent the catheter slipping back into the bear's gallbladder and to stop them biting it as well. So sometimes you can see these wings are chewed because the bears are obviously desperately trying to remove it from their abdomens.
Yeah, you can smell that too.
Yeah, in fact that was Jasper's.
This was Jasper's, oh dear.
I told you at the beginning, you know, my mother died of septicemia.
Indeed, yeah.
And, you know, as I say, it just brings it full circle because the bears are just so stoic. They seem to be able to withstand, you know, chronic disease.
Is this what you expected when you first rescued bears and started investigating?
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. I remember just looking with absolute abhorrence when Andrew, our first bear, arrived so many years ago here, and just not even believing that I was seeing this catheter, which was about 6 inches long, protruding from his abdomen, and just thinking how could he have lived those years with something so invasive in his system.
Speaking to staff and supporters, it's very obvious that Jill is an integral part of the charity. And although she is the CEO of the organisation, she's also very much the face of the charity, living, breathing and promoting Animals Asia wherever and whenever she travels.
It must be rather difficult to think of succession as far as you're concerned, because, I mean, you are so central to it. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, if that number 9 bus did come for me one day. I think that we've got people here that value and trust and love the foundation so much and are so loyal to it, including our board as well, that I think a lot of heads would be put together discussing who the next CEO would be.
Do you think the charity will need a similar, for want of a better word, star performer to carry on the ethos of the charity?
I think the CEO is fundamental to the success of the sanctuary, but you can only be a good CEO if you're really on the ground, on the programmes, and you're not just sort of a talking head, coming from a position of you know, misunderstanding how all the operation works. To be able to understand the bears, for goodness sake, the heart, you know, where everything lies with this incredible machine, I guess, of Animals Asia. It's important to be able to talk about it when you go abroad to presentations, etc., and to major donors and things, with conviction, with absolute intelligence. It's not just loving the animals that we help, but it's loving the people who help the animals, whoever they are. And I just think it's, first of all, having, I think, integrity in the ability to perhaps manage staff well, and not undermining them as well. You know, and recognising that every single person that works for this foundation has a role, is extremely good at their job, and just deserves, you know, to be able to manage without being micromanaged.
It's difficult to imagine somebody who's as passionate about what she does. Everything she does is for Animals Asia. Every time you see her, she'll be in an Animals Asia shirt. Like, she's promoting the work that we do all the time. Whenever she speaks to somebody new, she's talking about Animals Asia.
When they first started the organisation, obviously the team was quite small, and then it's mushroomed over the years, but she knows pretty much everybody, and she wants to make sure that they're all doing well and they're happy, and I mean, almost to a fault actually. She wants to make sure everyone's happy. So sometimes you can't make everybody happy, and as I think the organisation's got bigger, that's probably one of her biggest challenges.
I guess it's true to say she's not in any way your average CEO. She just isn't, because she is not in any way is she remote or protected. She's right in there, right at the coalface. You know, if there's something distressing, difficult, moving, whatever, she's there. She's right in the middle of it, always. However uncomfortable or, you know, unpleasant, she's right there.
So Jill, rewind 20 years. What would Jill say to Jill 20 years ago?
Jill would probably say the same as Virginia said to Jill so many years ago: just do it. I really believe that. I just think that along the way, you've just sort of shake yourself around a little bit and acknowledge that there's going to be massive difficulties as you do it, and you're going to really take some kicks, really some big kicks. But at the end of the day, just the joys of what you're doing and the responsibility of seeing so many lives of animals changed is going to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah. Is there one particular moment that stands out? What would that be?
I don't think people are all bad, you know, and as you sort of go through your life and you face all these sort of difficulties and pitfalls, it is just try to see the best that you can in people. Yeah. Because it's so easy to dismiss people as being egregiously cruel or wicked or unkind, and then suddenly you turn corners, like we turn corners with, you know, some of the bear workers here, of course, most of the bear workers, of course, that come here and completely change their whole perspective of why they're here and what they're doing. Yeah. And you know, even indeed with bear farmers as well. You know, we're working into a new era where we're inevitably going to be working with them to change the lives of the bears they have under their care. Yeah. So I just think we've got to do that with a very open mind and forgiveness in our hearts.
Is there one terrible thing that stands out?
I just think every time we lose a bear, I think just takes a little piece of you. Yeah. Just a little piece every time. It's inevitable, you know, but that saying by Andrew's grave, we're not weaker without you, but stronger because of you. Yeah. And we are.
There's a real truth and integrity to Jill, and I think that goes throughout the organisation. She knows every single bear, she knows all of their stories, and she's completely up to date with everything that's happening with them now. And for a CEO of a company to be able to be so familiar on such a ground level, I think is truly amazing. Yeah.
Jill didn't have the money when she went into this. You know, she went into this just knowing that something had to be done. And her vision was grand, right? I'm going to rescue thousands of bears.
See, the fact is, Jill has such a profound effect on you when you get to know her. There's no question. I will be by her side till I drop, because there's no walking away from her. She's too precious.
I didn't even know how to describe it. I admire her, and I'll follow her to the end of the world. Yes, she's my leader. You know, it took me a long time to come to that. I'm a bit emotional about it, so I don't want to go, but I admire her. She really has changed my life.
She's so beautiful, in and out. That's what I feel.
Together, we've taken the long route home, a hard road home that brings us closer. Together, we left what we built behind, a life that we couldn't find so far away. Birds calling, leaves falling, tide shifting, mist lifting, streets which seem so busy then seem so crazy when we moved away. Air which felt so close and cold, which smelled so false and old in times that passed. Clouds clearing, springs nearing, fields growing, streams glowing. Bottle it up and then throw it away. It seems another world, now it's like another place. Taste the air and become the dawn. What there was once doesn't stand anymore. The place still exists.